Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiridoluale. The headlines. Ukrainian refugee minister Lord Harrington quits before prime minister change in the UK. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov says the West and Russia will eventually strike a deal, but warns that Moscow will not allow its interests to be harmed at any such negotiations. And Germany announces a €65 billion package to curb soaring energy costs. Welcome. The minister in charge of the United Kingdom's Ukrainian refugee scheme has resigned ahead of the next prime minister taking office later on today. Lord Harrington said the role was no longer required because a permanent system was now in place for arrivals. The Tory pair said his work was essentially complete and the role was always meant to be temporary, adding that the move would allow the next leader to save on a ministerial post if they wanted to. The former Watford MP was appointed to the newly created role in March after criticism of UK efforts to house Ukrainian and Afghan refugees. He said initial criticism of the scheme was valid, adding that there was chaos with visa applications taking 4 weeks to process, but this had since improved. The Russian Defense Ministry says that Russian forces attacked foreign mercenaries in Donetsk as the Ukrainian military claimed they had repulsed Russian offensive in several regions. The Russian aerospace forces used high-precision weapons to strike 2 bases of foreign mercenaries in Donetsk, and that's according to the Defense Ministry spokesperson in Russia, Igor Konashenkov, who was speaking at a daily briefing last night. The Russian aerospace forces, missile troops, and artillery launched attacks at units and reserve forces of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Nikolaev-Krivov Rog direction, according to General Konashenkov. The spokesman added that Russian forces shot down one Su-25 assault fighter of the Ukrainian Air Force in the Nikolaev region. Moreover, Russian air defense troops shot down 5 unmanned aerial vehicles and intercepted 3 U.S.-manufactured HARM anti-radar missiles, according to him. The Ukrainian General Staff, on the other hand, said that the Russian forces had launched air attacks on multiple locations in Ukraine and shelled Ukrainian infrastructure with tanks and mortar. Ukrainian armed forces, according to their own headquarters, successfully repulsed Russian attacks in Bakhmut, Soledar, and other regions. Dmitry Peskov had blamed the EU for the suspension of the gas deliveries via the Nord Stream pipeline on some of these conflicts. But Mr. Peskov said the Europeans made an absolutely absurd decision where they refused to maintain the systems of the Russian energy giant Gazprom, so it's Gazprom's fault. Or it's not Gazprom's fault, but the fault of politicians who made such decisions. Let's take a look now at the update on the stories from this conflict over the weekend, starting with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's statement that Russia was trying to destroy normal life.
It would not be the first time the Ukrainian president has warned about Russia's plans for the continent and calls for European partners to further isolate the country. Europe has accused Russia of using its gas supplies to blackmail Europe amid the Ukraine conflict, which Moscow denies. Energy prices have soared since Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24, and scarce supplies could push up costs even higher. There are growing fears families in the EU will be unable to afford the cost of heating this winter. In other news from the invasion, Russia's defense ministry says forces continue to strike Ukrainian ammunition depots in various places as the Ukrainian military claimed they had repulsed Russian offensive in different directions. The Russian aerospace forces claim to have neutralized the provisional bases of the units from the 93rd Mechanized Brigade deployed and a provisional base of a company tactical force from the 95th Air Assault Brigade in Donetsk. Also, that the fighter aviation of the Russian aerospace forces had shot down 2 Ukrainian Su-25 fighters in Kherson region, as well as 1 MiG-29 of the Ukrainian Air Force, converted for launching HARM anti-radar missiles in the Dnipropetrovsk region. A video released on Sunday showed a car narrowly missing an explosion in a street in Ukraine's Dnipropetrovsk region. The explosion happened a split second before the car, which was driving slowly along the street, approaching a crossroads. It is unclear what caused the explosion, and no severe damage appeared to have been caused to the already badly rotted road surface. It comes as Russian strikes hit a family clinic and a power line in Mikhail city center. The family clinic's pediatric department was partially destroyed and now cannot treat children. Mikhail's emergency services have begun working to repair a power line and water pipe in front of the clinic at the impact crater. Meanwhile, the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war raging in the east of Ukraine is proving to be a major setback for commercial farmers, as warfare has hindered production. The situation is set to be putting a strain on the country's food security and also the world as a whole. Maxim Biryuk is a farmer in Oktirka town of Ukraine's Sumy Oblast and owns a 3,000-hectare plantation along the Russian border with around 300 workers. Destroyed tanks and landmines scattered around are some of the scars of the military conflicts which have made jobs of Ukrainian farmers, such as Maxim, extremely difficult.
It's a very dangerous situation because a lot of anti-tanks mines, on the fields, on the road. It can be just over here. I don't know, because it's green. And our worker, 1 month ago, it was a huge explosion, 11 anti-tanks mines. He died, and his body is flew just 200 meters from car.
Countries that rely heavily on Ukrainian grain supplies are getting some relief in recent days as food exports resume out the Black Sea after months of blockade. Maxim plans to export via the Odessa port, but it does not see much economic viability at the moment.
And as we had been reporting, Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, has said Europeans have made an absolutely absurd decision when they refused to maintain the systems of the Russian energy giant Gazprom. So it's not Gazprom's fault, but the fault of the politicians who made the sanctions decision for the interruption in gas supplies. Gazprom has reported that an oil leak in a turbine was detected during joint maintenance work with Siemens at the only remaining Trent 60 gas compressor unit of the Potovaya compressor station. Gazprom said it would not resume gas supply to Germany via Nord Stream 1 until the fault had been fixed. The Ukrainian Infrastructure Ministry said on Sunday that it has dispatched its largest convoy of grain ships so far since the beginning of the implementation of the UN-brokered grain initiative. In the meantime, a total of 13 ships left from the ports of Odessa, Chernomorsk, and Pivdeny, carrying 282,500 tons of agricultural products to 8 countries. President Volodymyr Zelensky says his forces have retaken 2 settlements in southern Ukraine, a 3rd settlement in the east, and additional territory in the east of the country. He did not say precisely where the territories were and provided no timeline except to say he had received, quote, good reports at a meeting from his military commanders and the head of intelligence. In his nightly video address, Mr. Zelensky thanked his forces for liberating a settlement in the eastern Donetsk region.
I spoke today with the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. It was, as usual, very meaningful, very beneficial conversation about all aspects of our relations. I thanked her for the support already provided. I also thanked her for the efforts to limit excessive Russian profits from oil and gas. I called to speed up the provision of financial assistance to Ukraine. We discussed new sanction steps. In particular, I believe that the 8 sanctions package must include pan-European visa decisions in relation to Russian citizens, such that none of those involved in this war can enjoy European hospitality. The Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, commanders of operational areas, At the end of intelligence reported that these were good reports. And today I want to thank the soldiers of the 63rd Battalion of the 103rd Brigade of the Territorial Defense Forces that ensured the result in the Donetsk region. The settlement was liberated. The 54th Brigade in Lysychansk-Seversk direction also made good steps, moved forward, and took certain heights. I would also like to mention the 42nd Separate Motorized Infantry Battalion. Thanks to its heroic actions, 2 settlements in the south of our state were liberated.
Керівник розвідки, хороші доповіді були.
President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine. Let's talk now to Mr. Johnson Chukwu, economist, chief executive officer of Carry Assets Management Limited, on some of these developments, particularly the issue of oil supplies and the capping of prices. Nice to have you with us, Mr. Chukwu. Good morning.
Good morning, Ladi. Thank you for having me.
The European Union had been warned against this move that if it capped the prices of oil, then Russia would no longer supply, and that the effect of that would be immediate. But it has gone ahead to do that in spite of that warning. What do you think the immediate impact of that would be in Europe, but then more broadly speaking?
Okay, I think what will happen in Europe is that the price of oil will trend northwards, because one is that if you try to eliminate Russian crude, then you are trying to, because if Russia decides not to supply, which I doubt, but what I think that Russia is likely focusing on China and India as their export market for their crude, because certainly Russia knows that we're going to get to this point where the European Union will do everything to win itself for Russian crude. But as of today, Russia still is the third largest crude producer in the world, just behind the US and Saudi Arabia. So the world can't do without Russian crude. So any attempt to cap the price of
Well, we seem to have a bit of difficulty with Mr. Chukwu. I understand you're back. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Please proceed. Please go on.
Okay, sorry about that break in transmission. So what I was saying is that any attempt to cap Russian crude price will simply drive that crude into the parallel market. And what will happen is that you're going to see that crude routed through the countries like India and China, and then you see come back to the European market. Because the truth is that the world today can't. There's no capacity now to substitute the Russian crude globally. Even if you talk of the swing producers like Saudi Arabia, that produce about 10 million barrels a day, they don't have capacity to produce about an additional 10 million barrels a day. And countries like Nigeria have been a drag in OPEC production quota. So I think that will be very difficult to implement as of today. Of course, there are other issues they are talking of. Come December, they need to win themselves of Russian crude, and then by February next year, they also win themselves of refined petroleum products from Russia. But those are tough calls, given the demand-supply metrics in the oil and gas sector.
It does look as if Russia is calling this bluff precisely because of the reasons that you have given, that they can't be replaced that quickly. And we have winter coming in Europe. So whether or not the countries really want to wean themselves off, if there's no choice, they need these supplies. They need energy supplies. And they're going to get them, if they get them at all, even from other sources, at much higher cost. Already we've seen the impact of that on their various economies.
Yes, and you're absolutely right. The winter coming up, of course, we're seeing countries like Germany, they're very worried. Natural gas prices has actually hit the roof in Germany, and even other Western countries are seeing price of natural gas going up. That is energy supply sources. And of course, we know the demand for refined petroleum products drops during the winter. But there are other major supply that is coming from Russia. Like I mentioned, the natural gas. Russia is the largest exporter of natural gas in the world. So if you're trying to ban or put a restriction or cap on Russian oil, you should also expect that Russia will retaliate, which is what they are doing by turning off the gas supply to other Western European countries. So, and there are concerns that people could freeze to death in some of the countries, like the Scandinavian countries, if they also depend on Russian gas. So the global energy economics today has been largely distorted because Russia cannot be whisked away. Russia sits at the epicenter of the supply of energy sources in the world. And the European Union, in as much as they will want to do everything to reduce that, because what we have seen now is that Russia is using that as a critical economic war tool to push back on the Western support for Ukraine. But as it stands today, the world has not found enough availability of alternative energy to call the bluff of the Russians as it relates to energy supply.
Let's bring this a little bit closer to home, shall we? You referenced it in your answer to the first question when you said that, well, countries like Nigeria have not been able to meet up their quota concerns, which has also caused even further supply disruptions. But the other side of this is that even the revenue that Nigeria was supposed to be earning from the higher prices, we're not able to earn because we're not able to produce as much, and because we are importing the end product for consumption, we are in fact paying more for subsidy. So it's like we are losing at both ends of the enterprise. With what you said now, the prices going up, are we not going to suffer even more? Is our subsidy bill, for example, not possibly going to be much higher and have its spiral-on effect on other businesses?
Yes, I think we can't deny that happening because as it stands today, the Minister of Finance budgeted about 3.4 trillion naira for the first 6 months of next year subsidy, which means we'll be approaching 7 trillion based on current prices. So if energy prices, particularly the refined petroleum product, goes further up, then Nigeria will suffer double whammy, because we're not producing enough, like you pointed out, and we're also importing entire 100% of consumption, and we're paying elevated prices based on international market prices on those imported products. But I'm also aware that the government is trying to take measures to see if it can reach some level of admittance or some level of accommodation with the Niger Delta region where crude is produced. I only think that they need to expand that engagement to include all oil-bearing communities and communities where the pipeline passed through, so that they will also have critical stake in whatever is produced, and they will not want to jeopardize their interest. So if we do that, we probably could see an increase in production beyond what is. This country has done, at some point, we're actually the 5th largest crude producer in the world. We went back to 8, and now we're about the 15th in the world. We just have 1.5 million barrels. We can actually we have the capacity to go back to 2 million barrels in a short while, within the next 3 months, if we get the security situation right. So there is still some element of hope that if we can fix our house, if we can take care of our domestic front, we should begin to enjoy the benefit of elevated crude price. But if we don't do that, we're going to suffer double whammy. We're going to see increased subsidy payment. Not just we're paying subsidy payment, we also are not earning enough foreign exchange to even fund the importation of refined petroleum product, which is the challenge we have. And then we're also going to deal with the issue of higher government borrowing, higher debt service, and an unbalanced federal government fiscal framework.
That is a grim situation that you have painted there, Mr. Chukwu. But we'll keep an eye on it, and of course we'll come back to experts like your good self in the coming days for this. But for now, thank you very much. Mr. Johnson Chukwu is the Chief Executive Officer of Cowrie Assets Management. Thank you for your time this morning.
My pleasure.
We'll take a break now, and when we return, amongst others, we'll have the very update situation on what is going on. How are countries hoping to tackle the energy crisis that is looming ahead? Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back to the program. The crisis between Russia and the West will inevitably be resolved at the negotiating table. So says the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov. He warned, however, that Moscow will be ready to defend its interests when that moment arrives, saying Western nations have made too many mistakes and will have to pay for them. The Kremlin official listed what he sees as Western errors, citing Germany's horrible decision to send weapons to Ukraine for use against Russian soldiers. He also criticized European nations for supporting a government that allows, quote, Nazis to openly demonstrate their symbols and stage torchlight processions, calling it, quote, no less horrible. Since the start of the Russian offensive against Ukraine in late February, gas prices have climbed to record highs in Europe, driving up overall inflation. Moscow has cited technical issues caused by Western sanctions as the reason for the gradual decline in gas deliveries. The EU, in turn, has accused Russia of using energy exports as a weapon. Germany has announced a 65 billion euro package of measures to ease the threat of rising energy costs as Europe struggles with scarce supplies after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The package, much bigger than two previous ones, will include one-off payments to the most vulnerable and tax breaks to energy-intensive businesses. Energy prices have soared since the February invasion, and Europe is now trying to win itself of Russian energy. Ukraine has urged Europe to stand firm. Let's talk to our business correspondent, Ini John McWow, who joins me now. Morning,
Good
Ini.
morning. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday to you, too. So it's all business today
Yeah.
on all of this. Non-restoration of supply. We talked about this on Friday.
Yes.
When Russia said, look, we're having some technical problems with returning
and it's going to be
supply.
just 3 days, so we expected that gas will start flowing by Saturday, but
that has not happened
that
up
has
till
not
now.
happened. Doesn't look like it will happen, because now Russia is saying that the repairs that they need to do, that they need some equipment that has to be imported from Germany, and we do know that the sanctions will not allow Germany to send anything. So I don't know, we don't want to say it's obvious, but analysts are saying that it's quite obvious that this is just a way to pay back, you know, and show them that, well, if you would not remove the sanctions, then you will be the one to pay for it even more. So, and of course, we know that this has, even though before, I think last week, Germany had said that their gas store is about 85%, and they were doing well and all of that. But I mean, just the news that there's no restoration and it looks like it's going to be indefinite has increased the prices of energy again. I think it's about 400% more than normal now. And you can only imagine what that's doing. Even back in the UK, producers are cutting on production now because of surging enemy price, even though, you know, UK is not directly depending. But of course, we do know in the region, whatever happens, it's a global world. If there's no much supply, then it affects everybody. So even in the UK, they're also feeling it.
And in any case, all of this is coming alongside the issue of caps.
Yeah, price caps.
For prices, which is another conflict zone.
Yes, very conflicting zone. And it's going to be very difficult, I think, for the EU to implement this because, number one, we call it cheap oil already. So Russia is selling at a lower price to the people buying it. And the people buying it, mainly China and India, are already saying that because of the sanctions and the way they have to circumvent, you know, the process to buy it, it's already costing them more. You have shipping, you know, that is high cost. You have insurance. Insurance has more than tripled since the war started, you know, so they're already paying more. So by the time you now say you want to put a price cap, number one, who is going to monitor to ensure that this price cap that you place is going to actually be kept? Number two, China and India, who are the majors, customers consuming Russian oil at this time, they are not part of the G7 that are agreeing to this. So, I mean, they are not bound by it to say, oh, okay, because of the price cap. And then Russia has also said that anybody who joins, or any country who joins with the price cap,
will no longer receive
supplies. Will
supplies.
not receive any supplies. So, I mean, I don't know how the EU is going to implement this price cap. It looks like it's going to be really difficult for them, but maybe they have some things up their sleeves that we do not know about at this time.
Am I right to assume, as a result of all of this, the markets have had a fairly rough time?
Yeah, well, of course, the oil market. Well, with all of this, obviously, first of all, price was up and global price oil. And then to make it worse, OPEC is meeting today, OPEC Plus is meeting today to decide if they are going to increase their supply. But it looks like they're not going to increase their supply. And then the talks with Iran is not bringing a lot of fruit. So we don't know where the extra supply is going to. So that's squeezing the market, increasing prices at this time.
Indeed. I don't know. I mean, you referenced the UK there. I was hoping that we'll be able to talk to correspondent Juliana Olayinka in London. Hopefully, we might be able to speak to her. And if indeed she is, let me thank you, Ini, for that. There'll be more, of course, on the business part of it later on, right after this show, and then on Business Incorporated at 1:30. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Let's go now to the British capital where we can, I understand, talk now to Juliana Olayinka. Juliana, good morning. Lots of stuff happening with you right over there. Let's start with the most prominent one, shall we? The succession. We're supposed to get to know in about 2, maybe 3 hours' time who the British Prime Minister will be after Boris Johnson. What's that looking like?
Good morning, Laddie. I just checked my clock. And yes, you're right on the money. In less than 3 hours' time, we are finally going to find out who will be the successor to Prime Minister Boris Johnson. The announcement will be made just a stone's throw away from number 10 Downing Street at the Queen Elizabeth II Hall in Westminster. All the money is on Liz Truss. She's been leading in the hustings. She's definitely a favourite among Tory members. But I think it's only fair that we do take our hats off to Rishi Sunak, the former Chancellor, because he did win all of the Conservative ministerial rounds. I believe about 200 Conservative MPs did vote for him. But when it went to the extended party members, I believe there's about 160,000 of them, he just didn't quite have the mustard, shall we say. Lots of people loyal to Boris Johnson were just not happy with him, quote unquote, stabbing him in the back, which is when he joined forces with Sajid Javid, who was then the health minister, to hand in his resignation. So we are going to be getting that announcement by Liz Truss later today. She will then tomorrow be sworn in officially by Her Majesty the Queen at Balmoral, which of course we know because of her health issues, it won't be taking place at Buckingham Palace. And then on Wednesday, she will be facing her arch nemesis, Sir Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour opposition party, for Prime Minister's questions. It has been a pretty bruising campaign, too long, some might say, because there are so many issues that are taking place across the world, including, of course, the war just on our front doorstep. But then, of course, we have a very serious, crippling cost of living crisis. So some have said, that she is facing an in-tray that is going to be one of the worst in-trays or longest in-trays that a prime minister has had since peacetime.
And I'm happy you mentioned that, because one of the things that she's been reported as having said is that once she takes office, within a week, she's going to produce an energy plan which references the cost of living crisis that you mentioned earlier. How is that being received? I know you said she's going to face Sir Keir Starmer on Wednesday, and I'm sure they're going to poke quite a number of holes in what the government response so far to this energy crisis has been.
Well, absolutely. We definitely can expect Sir Keir to go full guns blazing, baptism by fire, shall we call it. Yes, Liz Truss has said that she plans to tackle the energy crisis as soon as, which you'd expect from any prime minister, really. But I think there's a massive difference between campaigning and governing. And I think, the British people they've had enough of the campaign. They want action, and action is needed, quickly and speedily. You're just discussing with Vinny there the issue with energy prices at the moment. The energy price cap was risen a couple of weeks ago in this country to £3,500 a year. And that is an awful amount of money, an amount that nobody really in this country can afford unless you are in the mega rich category. And she said that she is planning to tackle that. Now, her rhetoric has changed as the situation has deepened. She said that she wasn't a fan of handouts, which is what we had during the pandemic. People were paid to basically stay at home. Government were backing loans of up to £50,000 a person. We know that most of those loans have been written off because people just can't afford to pay them back. But we've got a serious issue. Businesses are complaining that they will have to switch the lights off. They just cannot afford to pay for soaring prices. And if there are soaring prices, you've got to put your meals up because wages are stagnating. People can't afford to go to restaurants. So there's a double-edged sword here, and it's something that she'll have to tackle. So she has stopped saying that she won't be giving handouts because people will need handouts. So we are probably going to expect a further cost of living payment for vulnerable households. But then again, we've also heard from senior Tory ministers who say, you know, it's not just people on universal credit welfare benefits that need help. Middle income people need help. They're being squeezed to the left and the right, and they've not had any assistance from government. So perhaps we'll expect something from higher earners there. She's also been mulling over perhaps scrapping that 1.25% increase on national insurance, which is what Chancellor Rishi Sunak imposed during the spring budget. Also, corporation tax was increased by 19 to 25%. She's expected to scrap that. And then perhaps a cut in VAT from 20 to perhaps 15%, but we're not sure because, again, Laddie, you know more than I do because you've been covering politics for a lot longer than I have. You know, saying something when you're campaigning and actually doing it is a very different thing. But then again, you know, this is a really serious, crippling issue, this cost of living crisis, the worst in a generation. People's living standards are being depleted daily as we speak. So definitely we're expecting something to be done, and sooner rather than later.
Well, you are absolutely right. And so many people, particularly in Britain, are not taking this lying down, shall we say. A series of strikes are also going to greet whoever it is that emerges prime minister, whether it is Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak. Most people, as you said, expect it to be Liz Truss. So if we take it to be Liz Truss, she's going to be greeted not just by Sir Keir Starmer in Parliament, but on the streets of London and elsewhere in Britain. A lot of strikes are planned involving not just the transport union. So she is going to have to take action whichever way pretty quickly.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this is all, again, about the cost of living standards. It's been a summer of unprecedented strikes, which began with the biggest rail strike that we've had in history. Over 180,000 rail workers were joining the picket lines because of pay, jobs and conditions. Those are the three terms that are always associated with the strikes that we've had here in the UK. They're not happy with stagnated pay. They're not happy with how employers are treating them. And they're also not happy with the conditions of work. And I think that is now going to be a serious issue as we try and tackle the cost of living. I think people in the UK, they want to be treated better by their employers. It's no longer you should be grateful to have a job. It's the reverse is true, that you should be grateful that I'm working for you in really difficult periods. Today, we actually have a barrister strike. We haven't seen this for many years. However, during the summer, we did have a lot of younger solicitors striking because, again, they're not happy with pay. Royal Mail are also facing a series of issues with their workers. They've had a series of strikes, more are to come. We're expecting another rail strike next week. There are discussions with union bosses about the potential of NHS staff striking. We're also hearing that teachers and university lecturers will be striking. So, you know, the summer of discontent is certainly going to be extended into the winter and colder months, where people are going to have to decide whether they heat or whether they eat. And that's a really difficult scenario for any prime minister to try to contend with, particularly when the husting in the campaign has been so absolutely bruising. There are so many issues that have been laid bare within the Conservative Party. But of course, the Labour Party are vying for power again. They're already ahead in the polls. If there was a general election this afternoon, they would win it by a landslide. So I think now Liz Truss, she is going to have to try and bring the party together, bring some of more of the left-leaning Conservatives within her party to appease them, because then again, even, or shall we just remind ourselves that even when she is announced as Prime Minister today, the vast majority of Conservative MPs wanted Rishi Sunak, and they're so far apart on policy. The only way she is going to be able to unite that party is to bring in people from the left and from the right so they can survive the next 2 years. And so a vote of confidence or a general election isn't called, and then they'll have to lose their seats, which of course no a member of parliament wants.
No member of parliament wants, but if they don't take action, that looks likely to be the result, because as you pointed out, people out there on the streets are quite angry. But momentous activity expected later on in the day. As always, we trust that you'll be on top of it, and we'll be getting in touch with you as indeed it happens, so we can bring it to our viewers. Juliana, thank you for your time this morning. Do stay safe. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has received Ukraine's Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal for talks in Berlin, hours after Germany said it would provide Kiev with an additional 200 million euros. The money is intended to help the displaced people of Ukraine to continue to be able to provide for themselves the essentials. That's according to German Development Minister Sven Schulz in a statement. Mr. Scholz and Shmyhal were originally scheduled to speak to reporters, but the joint news conference was cancelled for scheduling reasons. And Russian President Vladimir Putin's absence from the funeral of former U.S. leader Mikhail Gorbachev is no surprise, as no love was lost between the two. President Putin had blamed former President Gorbachev for the collapse of the then Soviet Union. This much was said by former Minister, Chancellor, and Economic and Trade Advisor at the Nigerian Embassy in Moscow, Ambassador Judy Okafor. In an interview on Diplomatic Channel, he said the collapse of the Soviet Union was inevitable because of the trajectory of independence currently going on within the Union. Mikhail Gorbachev, the last leader of the Soviet Union, had died last week Tuesday at the age of 91. He was buried on Saturday next to his wife in Moscow, where many prominent Russians lie.
In reality, there was no way anyone, be it the late leader or any person, could stop the kind of changes or reform, because it was glacial for anybody to see change at the level of the political destiny, because these countries knew. They felt that something was holding them in terms of the regimentation, in terms of freedom, in terms of democracy. There was no way. So by the time the Georgia and the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania felt it was enough, there was no way you could control such a thing. You can imagine, say, East Germany, that 1989. By the time they crossed from the East to West Berlin in Germany, and the Berlin Wall fell, there was no way anybody could control that.
For the full interview with Ambassador Waffle, please watch Diplomatic Channel. It airs later on tonight on our platforms at 11:30. The UN nuclear watchdog says the Russian-controlled Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine has lost its link to its last remaining main power line. The International Atomic Energy Agency added that the plant, which is Europe's largest, is now relying on a reserve line to supply power to Ukraine's grid. Separately, Ukraine's state nuclear company said only one of the station's 6 reactors remains in operation. Both Ukraine and Russia accuse each other of repeatedly shelling the plant. Inspectors from the IAEA arrived at the plant last Thursday amid security concerns. After inspecting it, the agency chief, Rafael Grossi, said the integrity of the plant had been, quote, violated several times. Located in the city of Anahoda in southern Ukraine, Zaporizhzhia is still being operated by Ukrainian staff, who have said Russian troops are using it as a military base and that workers are in effect held at gunpoint. And we still got a sports story here. Unified heavyweight champion Alexander Usyk has received a huge support for joining in the fight against Russia's invasion of Ukraine, including from two former opponents. Usyk reveals that British boxers Tony Bellew and Derek Chisora reached out about how to help Ukraine after Russia's invasion. Since beating Anthony Joshua by a split decision in a rematch to defend his unified heavyweight world titles, Usyk has returned to his home country of Ukraine. Prior to the fight, Usyk had been fighting against Russia's invasion alongside his fellow countrymen after joining the local territorial defense force in Kiev. And that's how we're going to wrap up the program this morning. Thanks for being with us. My name is Ladi Akari-Duluali. There's an update at 5 o'clock within the world today. Do join us for that. The show's back tomorrow. Do have yourselves a pleasant Monday ahead.